Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Travel Vault webinar. This is our fourth webinar now, where we're aiming to keep you updated on the latest developments during the current crisis. Today, I'm joined, as usual, by Matt Purser and Adam Pennyfather from Travel Trade Consultancy and Farina Azam from Kemp Little. We also have a new panellist, Richard Buxton, Finance Director of Inspire Europe, who's going to provide us with some insight onto how they've been dealing with the current crisis. As usual, all attendees are muted just for a better sound quality. But if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom app. If you've dialed in using your phone, then please feel free to email me any questions and I will keep an eye on that as well. Please don't use the chat function as it's quite difficult to monitor both at the same time. Hopefully we can get through as many as possible. So first today, without any further ado, I'll ask Matt if you wouldn't mind providing an update on the latest developments in the last week.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, there's not been too much of an update. ABTA is still leading the campaign with government around changing the package travel directive. They launched a new website this week under savefuturetravel.co.uk, which allows you to send a message to your local MP to get them to agree to this change. I think they've had quite a good response to that already. But my fear is the longer this goes on, it seems less likely that government are actually going to change the directive around that. I think that still means that refund credit notes will exist, and obviously everyone is in the position where they're still trying to persuade their clients that this is a good option for them to take it forward. But whether we'll go as far as saying they have to take these instead of cash refunds, then obviously we're also still on the tenterhooks waiting to see if that happens. There was some change around the FCO advice last weekend around the sort of no travelling for the imminent, for the future. ABTA's advice still is only to look at imminent departures. There's no legal definition of imminent, unfortunately, but everyone seems to be looking at around sort of 2 weeks in advance still. If you're looking at whether trips should be cancelled or not, nothing is going. Their advice is not to look beyond that. So despite the FCO advice, that doesn't mean that we are, not going to travel for the rest of the year or anything like that. It's all just still being monitored on the same way as it was. So the FCO advice is not seen to change too much on that side of things. And the last thing really was around the date of these refund credit notes. We've had ABTA have still got their 31 July date in there. I think that is likely to change. I think what we want to try and see is that everyone does move to a similar date, because the last thing we want is different associations having different dates in there, because that's going to be so confusing for the industry, let alone the public as well. So keep your eyes on that as well. But yeah, I think it's all still as it was, trying to issue refund credit notes if you can. And that was it from me. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I think you're right. We're all just waiting with bated breath, really, to see whether the government is going to issue anything. And I think a lot of people are a bit sceptical now. Farina, I know that you have been dealing with a lot of issues around chargebacks at the moment, which is obviously where consumers are trying to get their refund through that way. Have you got any update or any, basic advice on that you can give to our members?
Yes, thanks, Christina. Yeah, so the main issue right now that the 14-day period has expired, and customers if they haven't received their refund, then now trying to make a claim through the credit cards for the chargebacks. So my advice is to respond to every chargeback that you receive, because I think it is worth trying to fight the chargebacks as opposed to just letting it go through without a fight. There is guidance out there. So there's guidance out there from MasterCard and Visa and it's our COVID-19 dispute resolution guidance, and it's all about how to deal with chargebacks and how card acquirers should be dealing with chargebacks. It's actually very, very travel focused. If you look through it, you'll see a lot of the examples are travel examples. So it's actually very useful. They're very similar in one respect, but there's one glaring difference between the two, and that is that Visa in their Q&A section specifies that if a holiday has had to be cancelled due to government restrictions or government regulation, then the customer is not entitled to a chargeback, because the government regulation overrides the Visa's dispute resolution procedure. And but MasterCard actually states the other thing, which is MasterCard states that customers are entitled to a refund even where the travel services have had to be cancelled due to government regulations. So two differing positions. So the response that you have, should differ depending on whether it's a MasterCard or a Visa. But there are lots of other things within the guidance as well, which can be pulled out and used. So my advice very much is, put together a template response, that outlines the various issues that comes from the guidance. Also, don't forget under Section 75, if you act as an agent, that you shouldn't be receiving Section 75 chargeback claims because you're not the supplier of the services purchased by the customer. So again, you could actually put forward quite a robust response outlining that to the card acquirer. And obviously I can't sit here and say guarantee that you would succeed in chargeback responses by responding in that way, but I think it certainly puts you in a better position, in a stronger position to respond to those chargebacks.
Thanks, Serena, that's really helpful. And one thing we've talked about on previous webinars, and another way consumers are potentially trying to get their money, is through travel insurance. We've had a query from one of our attendees here who's basically said that an insurer, that the consumer has made a claim to the insurer, but the insurer has come back asking why the tour operator isn't adhering to the package travel regulations. And obviously they're concerned that if they refuse a refund, that the insurance company could potentially tell regulatory bodies that they're not adhering to PTR. Are you starting to see more of this, and do you have any advice for that person?
Well, I think it'd be you're in the same position as if a customer was threatening to report you to a regulatory body. ABTA have already relaxed their rules, so if you were to make a complaint to ABTA, then ABTA, as long as you're complying with the ABTA rule change, then ABTA isn't going to say very much. Obviously, we don't know how the CAA really are going to come out to respond to it. But I think otherwise I guess it would be a complaint to trading standards. But I think if they were to complain to a regulatory body, I think there is enough out there in terms of what ABTA have come out to say, and the fact that this is an unprecedented situation. I think you could file a pretty robust response to any kind of a regulator that was to contact you in that situation. And I think the key here is, if you are not complying with the PTRs, if you are complying with ABTA rules, if you're complying with how ABTA is saying that you should be responding to this, then that's what you would point to, and you would say, look, we're an ABTA member, we're complying with our trade body. Link them to the ABTA website and say, because of the unprecedented situation, there have been changes in the industry standards right now, and that's what we're complying with.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. It's as you say, it's unprecedented, and I think some people in the industry are taking comfort from the fact that at least a lot of tour operators are taking this approach, and it's not going to be a case of one tour operator being reported to the regulatory authorities. It is a mass industry response. It is,
and I think I think the key here as well, especially if you look at the ABTA rules and what they're trying to do, is that they're not saying that no refund will be given. There isn't a refusal here to refund. It's that, what they're saying is actually you will get a refund, but it's not going to be within 14 days. So the only rule within the PTRs that we're not complying with here is the 14-day refund period. And in that time, your payment will be protected through this refund credit note, which gives us time to try and recover the money, from suppliers, or get the money from other sources to be able to issue you with a refund. If you wanted to rebook an alternative holiday in that time, fantastic. But if you didn't, when we get to the end of that period, we will give you a cash refund. So I think the key there is to just point out that the only rule that we're not, the travel companies are not complying with right now is a 14-day payment rule.
Okay, thank you. And many of our members aren't necessarily a member of ABTA as well, but is it fair to say that because of the stature that ABTA has in the industry, being, a trade body representing a lot of tour operators, that we can still, comply with their guidance, and doing that is still a reasonable thing to do in the circumstances?
Absolutely, absolutely. Even if you're not an ABTA member, ABTA is a really well known as a travel body, and they've made all the guidance and everything that they're giving out public for customers, and it can be linked to and sent through to, and you would just treat it as this is the industry standard right now.
Great, thank you. And we've had a couple of queries actually. Obviously, package travel regulations, we talk most commonly around European customers and UK customers, but some of our members sell to outside of Europe as well. Do the same rules apply? Do they still have a legal obligation to refund non-European clients?
It will depend on whether you've actively sold to customers in other countries. So if we use the US example, if you've been actively promoting and selling your products in the US, so you would be looking at a US website, taking payment in dollars, advertising your holidays in dollars, having particular promotions that are directed just towards the US market, that would be actively selling to the US marketplace. And if that's what you're doing, then you need to comply with the US. That I would say that there's an argument that you would need to be complying with the US laws and regulations. Otherwise, and obviously to do that, you'd have to get local advice. But otherwise, if it's just somebody's made a booking with you on your website, because obviously anyone in the world can access your website, then you just have to, you're subject to UK law, and you have to comply with UK law in relation to those customers as well.
Great, thank you. And just sorry, we've had another question on insurance. As I said, a lot of people are being asked for confirmation from insurers why they're not providing a refund. One member has said an insurer has asked when we cancelled with suppliers, cancellation amounts, what we can refund, asking for lots of information on the circumstances and actually what funds they have. Do they legally have to provide this information to the insurer, or can they just provide a cancellation invoice?
I think it would come down to, there's no contract between the travel insurer and the tour operator. The contract is between the travel insurer and the customer. I think the issue you would have is if that's what they're asking the customer to get from you, and you refuse, and then that means that the customer's claim is refused, and obviously that again will result in an unhappy customer. But I wouldn't say that there's a legal obligation on the tour operator to comply with the insurer's request in that way. But it all comes back to the fact that if the customer's claim would then, travel insurance claim would then be rejected, and they would come back to you even unhappier.
Yeah, absolutely. So it may be in the best interests of them and the customer then to provide additional information.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we've got some schools tour operators on the call, and some schools are not paying their balances now. They've been instructed not to pay the balances to tour operators for future bookings. So some bookings obviously in May, some further along than that. What rights do tour operators have in those circumstances where schools are simply refusing to pay the balance?
Well, you can enforce your terms and conditions. So if you've asked for payment by the balance due date and it's not been given, that would, depending on what your terms and conditions say, but I'm assuming that they would say we're entitled to cancel this booking and retain your deposit. The issue that you would have there is, I mean, the issue that you would have there is, I guess they could turn around to you and say, well, you're not complying with your terms and conditions and giving us a refund if they think that they're due one. But actually, if you're at a stage where the school is only having to pay the balance now, then I would say the trip is sufficiently outside of the period for you to even consider it for cancellation. So in that circumstances, then yeah, you absolutely can cancel the booking and retain the deposit as your cancellation charge, provided that that's what you have in your terms and conditions.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Farina, or potentially to Matt. I'll read what the person's asked. So if a client has paid a balance for their holiday and cancels without wishing to rebook, the agent will have kept their commission when passing the balance to the tour operator. If the client then expects a refund under the PTRs, should this be net of commission from the operator with the agent adding their commission to this?
It would depend on why the customer has cancelled. So if under the PTRs, the customer is entitled to a full refund, so that would be if they have a right to cancel under 12.7 due to unavoidable and extraordinary circumstances, or the tour operator is the one who's cancelled. In those circumstances, customers are entitled to a full refund, so that would have to include the commission because the customer has paid that. But if the customer is cancelling just due to disinclination to travel, then you, the supplier, you are entitled then to impose your own cancellation charges. Whether you would have to pay, and your commission would then be, you would then receive commission on the cancellation charges, I would have thought. But it depends on what's written in the agency agreement between you and the tour operator.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Was the agency agreement is important there because it will specify what happens in a cancellation and whether that's they're entitled to keep that commission or not.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So thank you, Farina and Matt, for answering those questions. If anyone has any other questions that they'd like to ask, please submit them via the Q&A. But in the meantime, we're going to have a chat with our new panellist, Richard Buxton, Finance Director from Inspire Europe. Richard, you've been Finance Director at Inspire Europe since 2013, I think. Is that right?
I have indeed.
So you must, this must be one of the worst scenarios you've seen during that time. And your company, I understand, acts as both travel agent and tour operators. You're in an unusual position where you're kind of seeing both sides of how this is being dealt with. How are you seeing, how are you dealing with your customers, and what are you seeing other tour operators doing at the moment?
Well, the biggest challenge for us has definitely been having to manage the customer expectation here. We have thousands and thousands of bookings, and it's managing the different messages that are coming back from all the tour operators, the principals, and trying to manage the customer's expectation in relation to that. So one of the things that Farina and Matt just talked about was agency bookings and customers' disinclination to travel, and what you do in relation to applying your own terms, booking terms and conditions in relation to that. But what the scenario for us is, we've been trying to manage the issue around the refund credit notes and what we do about that, and trying to follow the guidance from ABTA and looking at stress testing our own cash position against whether we should refund against issuing a refund credit note. And we've come to the conclusion that from next week we're going to start issuing refund credit notes, which has been a big decision for us to get to because it hasn't been legislated at all. But one of the things that Farina mentioned as well is that this isn't refusing to issue a refund, it's actually just pushing that refund further down the line to give yourself some breathing space. We're in a fortunate position that we have the infrastructure to be able to issue refund credit notes via our, what we have is a gift card solution. It's one of our routes to market. So we're going to issue them through that methodology. So that will allow us to track them and then be able to go back to customers and rebook. But I struggle to understand, I struggle to see how other organisations will be able to manage that, because it's such a manual process, or it may be such a manual process for them. I think that's going to be their challenge.
And do you have any kind of practical advice on potentially how people can manage that, you know, if they don't have the infrastructure that you have to deal with it?
I mean, we were talking yesterday. One of the biggest challenges that, for me, it's going to be such a manual process for them, because each refund credit note effectively will have to be manually produced, listing the original booking number, and then they're going to have to track that through their system. I said we're in a very fortunate position that we can do that on an automated basis. We already have that infrastructure. But to be able to, you've got to keep all your staff on to be able to do that. Therefore, you're not able to furlough these staff. I was hoping, although I never really believed it would happen, that the travel industry may get an exception on the furloughing aspect, because they're having to deal with all the customer aspects of bookings, refunds, cancellations. But otherwise, I fear it's going to be a very, very manual process for most other organisations. I'm not directly in contact with anyone talking to me about it. But otherwise, you're just going to have to manually issue a refund credit note and track that, which I think is going to be very tough.
Absolutely. And how have your customers been reacting to the refund credit notes? Have they been accepting them, or has there been some, you know, some unhappy customers that you've had to deal with?
Well, we haven't actually issued any yet. We're just putting that in place to start next week. We've been talking this week with my operations team about doing it and getting to a point, and we had a board conversation on Tuesday, and we agreed that's what we're going to do. At the moment, we did some statistics last night. We're seeing, for those customers that are wishing to or are unable to travel at the moment, we're seeing approximately a 50% rebook against the 50% cancellation rate at the moment. I was hoping we might get more on a rebook rate, obviously, or an amend rebook, but we're seeing about 50% cancellation. We're tracking all the information in relation to the amount of cash that's due to be refunded, and therefore I'm able to stress test the business in that respect. But as I said, we're going to start issuing these refund credit notes on the ones that have cancelled from next week.
So have you told your customers already that they will be getting refund credit notes, or are you potentially anticipating having to deal with that and the potential you know, response to that next week when you start?
Well, we were in the 14-day period.
Right, okay.
So we haven't physically gone out and said, I mean, originally some of our admin team were saying, yes, you'll get a refund. Now, for the last 8 to 10 days, we've been saying you're going to receive some form of notification that will allow you to be able to rebook. It's been just managing customer expectations on that. It really has. In all fairness, I would say most customers across the board are understanding of the situation, and that is somewhat surprising. I suppose in a different scenario you might not expect that, but in all fairness, most customers are understanding of the situation at the moment. However, they are cancelling, and that is the reality of the situation.
Yeah. And how have you been managing your suppliers? Because obviously, you know, the refunds is very much dependent on you being able to get that money back from your suppliers, and also amending bookings as well, you know, whether your suppliers have been happy to postpone trips. What have your findings been?
I think if there's any advice I'll give to others, that is the absolute key to this situation, is actually getting an engagement with your suppliers and trying to work with them on their terms, what they're prepared to do. I mean, we are a large agent in terms of when we act as in our agent capacity, we're a significant agent for a number of particularly UK suppliers, and they've been particularly able or particularly willing to try and work with us on credit terms. So one in particular has pushed back their payment terms to us, which is going to enable us to push back payment terms to our customers, i.e. reduce it significantly. That will give everyone breathing space to take a step back, have a look at what's going to happen over the next 5-6 weeks, and take a view from there. Because my personal view is, and this is only a personal view, it's obviously there's no empirical evidence to suggest it. My personal view is that if we go through another 4 to 6 weeks of this, there will be people desperate to start booking something maybe for 2021 or end of 2020. And I'm hoping that that will generate new business, because it's a hard period of isolation for everyone. And I think that they will need something to look forward to at the end. It will be dependent on the news that comes out on relaxation of the current rules, and obviously a reduction on when this might end as well. But that's my personal belief, or my personal hope, I should say.
And I think that's one of the difficult things for everyone, you know, particularly in the industry, is not knowing when it's going to end, and not knowing, you know, when bookings might pick back up, when people might be willing to book a holiday, whether it's for this year or next year. I mean, what do you think about that? When are you hoping, or what have your customers been saying to you about that, when they'd be prepared to start booking again?
Well, that really is an interesting question. I think that's one of the key topics for any organisation at the moment. This goes back to something that you were talking about on your last week's call, which is your relationship with the bank and doing cash flows for your bank. We have a very good relationship with our bank, and we are in a very good position. Again, we do very, very detailed analysis and budgets and forecasts, very, very detailed in that respect. And I'm talking to them about what they're going to need in relation to a potential civils loan that we may be looking for in June, depending on what happens with bookings. And I said to them, well, I can do pre-COVID and post-COVID budgets for the new financial year, and our year starts beginning of April. But I said the problem is that I just don't know when it's going to change. I don't know what is going to happen in terms of new bookings. And they are stuck in that scenario of potentially looking at having to approve a possible loan without anyone really knowing what's going to happen in that respect. Customers are starting to look. We've seen in this particular week a slight improvement on the previous week in terms of new bookings. So we are seeing some new bookings, although very low volumes to what we would normally see. But it does feel that as the weeks progress, people will start to want to have something to look forward to, even if that's in next year. You know, it gives you something to look at in the future. I think that's, if I say anything, I say that this week has been slightly better than last week, although obviously very, very low compared to where we normally would be.
And are you seeing those bookings, because obviously you sell UK trips as well, are you seeing those bookings predominantly for your UK offering, or is that you know, Europe-wide as well?
We're seeing a mix. In all fairness, we're seeing a mix. UK, I think, will obviously, as soon as relaxation on current movement will reduce, obviously people will be able to travel around the UK. And I think, I would say that anyone that's not selling UK should start to think about it, because it will be the thing that will move first, rather than Spanish holidays, etc. But we've also put incentives in place for our customers, you know, £50 future booking gift cards, etc. if they book now, even if the bookings are for 2021. So it's trying to look outside the box and look at any type of marketing activity that might drive new business. But I think that my view is UK bookings will move first, and then foreign holidays will come after that, because the restrictions on global movement will take longer than internal UK movement.
And when you talk about marketing, are you actively marketing at the moment, or have you kind of put it on pause until, you know, a couple of weeks when situation is clearer?
No, we're actively marketing. We're actively marketing to our customers. A lot of our customers are on a closed user group, so they already hold a voucher from us that they have to book with effectively, so we can market directly to those. So we're not actively marketing in the press, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
But we are trying to put ideas to people. We are definitely trying to do that. Not aggressively, you know, we're just sort of starting to move that along, so that when they are ready in the hopefully next 3-4 weeks to book, then they have ideas that they can book with us.
But that's to your direct, you know, customer existing customer database at the moment.
Yeah, because we have a closed user group on those customers that can't book anywhere else with us. Than with us, I should say.
And obviously, this situation is just putting an enormous financial strain on, you know, on travel business particularly. you talked a little bit about CBILS earlier, but what do you think of the government's financial support measures so far?
I think what they've done is fantastic, and obviously we're all watching the news, and we're watching the Chancellor, what his comments are about what he's trying to do to support the economy. I think that, you know, it's quite a profound moment for everyone to look at themselves and what they want out of life and what this means to everyone. However, we have to look at things on a very black and white basis from a financial perspective. We acted very, very quickly. As soon as the problem rose, before any furlough scheme was in place, before any CBILS scheme was in place, we acted very, very quickly to reduce our overheads as quickly as we could. We announced to the staff before the furlough scheme came in place that there was going to be a pay reduction. There was no other option. We spoke to landlords. We spoke to everyone that we could to remove all our costs out of our overheads, to do everything that we should from using, considering our fiduciary duties. Then the schemes were put in place, which allowed us to relax somewhat some of the actions that were taken. So what we did was we took all the actions that we felt we needed to take, but then the schemes that the government put in place allowed us to be a little less onerous on on the staff, and then obviously we were able to furlough some staff, although we haven't done that many. We were able to furlough some staff. So I think it's given everyone the opportunity to try and ensure that they can come out of this the other side. One of my big concerns on coming out the other side is that those companies that do have to take on debt will then suddenly have debt in their books. And what will that mean for renewals with the CAA, renewals with ABTA, etc.? That's a conversation that you and I will probably have over the coming weeks.
Absolutely.
But that is my big concern, because that debt has to be repaid. It's not a grant, it's debt. It's very clear it has to be repaid, and therefore it's a liability in your books again. So that's my biggest concern when I'm looking forward, that when we come out the other side, which we inevitably will, we will look a different organisation potentially if we've taken any significant debt on than we were prior to the problem.
And in terms of obviously, you know, looking at that and making sure you do manage that debt going forward, and managing the process with your bank, you talked a little bit about it earlier, but what key advice would you give to anyone who is thinking of applying for the CBILS?
So absolutely, the advice for me, and I've been talking to our bank regularly. I mean, we have a very good relationship. Our bank is Barclays, and they've been particularly supportive of us over a period of years. The relationship is good. What I said to you earlier was, you have to go to a lender with a very clear picture of what you were going to look like before this happened, what the impact has been, and what it's going to look like in the future. So we have worked very closely with my finance manager. She's prepared with me. We are doing a year-end position to the end of March, which is showing where we are actually now, or what we would have looked like if the situation hadn't arisen, i.e., you know, the last quarter of the year, which is a key quarter in the travel industry. We've also prepared 2 budgets. One is a full budget across the whole business, showing what we would have looked like without the COVID issue. And then we've got a whole new budget that we're prepared, which basically has no sales in for April and May, and then very few sales in for June, starting again in July, picking up in July. So we've got 2 budgets, so we can present all that to the bank. But going to them with a confused picture is not going to help in any application that you may require. They've made it very clear that the way we present our information to the bank, a very detailed analysis, a very understandable analysis with a pre and post COVID position, is going to be the way that they are going to credit check any request and approve any request. So that's what they've said. It's just about getting your information, stress testing your information, doing a couple of scenarios where obviously we don't know when bookings will pick up, but having an understanding of what it might look like with a prudent view and maybe a slightly better view is going to be the way forward for them. But they are supportive. They told me yesterday, Barclays have removed any request for personal guarantees, even if the loan is over £250,000, which I think is a great piece of news. We were concerned that any loan over £250,000 was going to require guarantees, personal guarantees. But they've said that's not the case. Barclays are going to take the risk on the 20% and the government will take the other 80% risk. So I think that's a very positive move by Barclays, certainly. I don't know if the lenders have agreed across the board.
I think that's great to hear. Obviously, the banks have come under a lot of criticism, you know, as a result of these personal guarantees. We've actually had one of the attendees on the call say that they're actually trying to make inquiries with Barclays regarding CBILS, but unfortunately they're in a queue and they'll be called. Now, I did see recently, you know, on the news that banks are overwhelmed with, you know, inquiries on this, and it's incredibly difficult time for them to manage everything. But did you approach your bank manager directly then, your relationship manager that you have in place? Yeah. So it's...
We're in a very fortunate position. We're not cash stretched at the moment. Obviously, with no new sales happening for the foreseeable future, my models tell me that come July, end of June, beginning of July, then we start to have a potential problem if there's no new sales. I spoke to I have a very good relationship with my relationship manager at Barclays. He has told me he has been under the most intense pressure trying to deal with the number of applications he has. So therefore, he asked me if I don't have to make any requests at this moment of time, then defer it till later. I said, I don't need to make anything until late May, probably. He said he'll push it through. He said if I can defer it till the end of May, he reckons it'll take 2 to 3 weeks to go through, which is in line with my expectations. But he did say that they are under the most intense pressure. I texted him yesterday because I couldn't get through to him. Just said, how are you? He phoned me back in the evening. He said he's just having a day off today because he can't cope with any more pressure on this. But obviously, it's very difficult to get hold of them. I suggest anyone that has a relationship with, anyone that has a direct relationship with a manager at a bank, text them, ask them to give you a call, because it is very tough to get through. But I wouldn't like to be going through, if I didn't have that direct relationship with them, I wouldn't like to be going through a general call centre for this. That would be a bit tough.
I think just while we're on this subject, I don't know if Adam and Matt potentially want to come in as to whether, you know, if people are having trouble getting through to their bank, whether there are any other channels that they could try to expedite the process, or any banks if they're not, you know, a client of theirs, a customer of theirs already.
You go on, Adam.
I was going to say, I'd like to say that there were, you know, we were chatting to NatWest yesterday, and Lloyd's actually, and you know, if you have got a relationship manager, I think as Richard said, you're, you know, quite fortunate in this situation. But even the RM yesterday, he was fielding any queries on your application. He couldn't speak to you until the 20th of April. And so that's a considerable amount of time, especially if you're in need of this cash now. But certainly, if you don't have a relationship manager, then, you know, we haven't experienced any other way than going through the general channel and essentially putting yourself in the queue. You know, all of the banks have been inundated. And so the one thing is we have experienced, they are dealing with, if you do have a relationship with them, then obviously they can clearly see your current position, assuming all your banks are with them. And we have experienced in prioritising people that need the money. And so if they can see what a position looks like, then hopefully you get looked at quicker.
I agree with that, Adam. What our relationship manager said was that he obviously can see where we are at. So he knew that there wasn't going to be an issue, and it tied in with what I was saying to him. He also said that obviously past management of our cash reserves or our cash balances will be factored in to any application, which I obviously found quite interesting. So what they did say was that if there was any doubt about repayment and affordability of any loan that's being requested, it will not get passed. You know, if they will not support a business that was having problems already. And I think that's obviously a challenge for a number of organisations.
Yeah, we've experienced the same. So all banks have to consider you. They would have to have lent to you pre-COVID. And so actually, if you're in a position where maybe your finances didn't stack up pre-COVID, then if they wouldn't have lent to you at that point, you know, even if you have been affected, you could be outside of the eligibility or the viability for them in terms of their risk as well.
Yeah, I was just on a conference call with Barclays, and somebody asked the question to the panel there about he's made a big repayment of his share capital. I couldn't quite understand exactly why he was saying it, but he said the bank flat rejected it because it didn't comply with an EU regulation on these loans. So it wasn't a Barclays decision. The Barclays are following certain EU regulations as well that are defined for lending. And therefore, what this particular organisation had done meant that they were just ineligible for a loan, which I found, the Barclays person was saying black and white, you just didn't pass this criteria, and therefore, irrespective of whether you were viable moving forward, you're not going to get the loan.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not quite sure that particular example, but if you've taken anything that's deemed to be aid under the EU rules, then yes, you wouldn't be eligible. Most banks are quite clear in terms of their websites on what's eligible and what's not. And so if you haven't checked that, I'd definitely say go there and just make sure. A lot of them are yes or no questions, and you have to be able to answer yes to all of them. So it's definitely worth going through that process first, rather than completing an application and doing projections, etc., only to find out that you didn't pass the initial test.
Just actually going back to what you just said there, I did ask our relationship manager, what does the application look like? Because you mentioned the word application there, because I was intrigued whether it was going to be some long, convoluted form that you're going to have to fill in and blah, blah, blah. He actually said, no, what all he's after is just our plans. And therefore that those plans to be able to support a request. So there isn't, as I understand it, there isn't a formal application that you have to make. It's just a submission of, as I said, we have very detailed budgets and forecasts. So it all stacks up, and that's all they would want. So there isn't, as I understand it, a formal application process, as he's told me.
That's interesting. I know lots of Lloyds have got one, and NatWest do as well. I think Santander have got one initially. I think that might have started with an interest form.
Okay.
But they aren't extensive really. It's more about the commentary that supports your assumptions and forecasts.
Yeah.
And so it's, neither or any of the ones that we've seen aren't particularly extensive.
But the key is obviously having detailed workings that show you will be able to service any debt. And I think that's all they want to know. They'll look at past performance, but if there's a doubt, he said, if there is a doubt that you will not be able to service the debt over the 5 or 6 year term, then that's where you're going to just fall flat.
Yes.
And I think obviously for those who potentially aren't eligible for the CBELs, it's worth going back to all the other financial support measures that the government has potentially introduced and that we've talked about previously. Adam, do you you still have information on that on the Travel Trade Consultancy website? That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, we do. We are going through and updating it. Some of the grants have started to come out now. Initially, people were being told that your local authority will be in contact. What we're experiencing is some are saying they'll be in contact. Others have got, forms that you can fill in on their website. And so we are updating our advice. But for now, I would say check your local authority website if you are looking for the grants, just to see what their latest information is.
Thank you, and we will provide links in our weekly mail shots to your website. But Adam, what's the website address, just so that people have got it? Do you know it offhand?
That is a very good question, Chris. It should be the ttc.co.uk. Sorry, I can't speak at this moment.
Thank you,
Chris. I was just going to add on the CBILS loans is that at the moment most banks are only accepting applications from their own customers. Adam, I think there was one that was more open. Was that Clydesdale Bank?
Yes, it was. Yeah, so we've had one application for a non-customer going to Clydesdale. Hasn't come back yet, but it has. We have managed to put an application in.
Okay, thank you. Richard, thank you very much for your insight into what you've been doing. It's been really helpful and really interesting to hear from someone who's going through it at the moment. And I think thank you to all of our other panelists as well. I mean, if anybody wanted to add any final comments, now is the time.
Nothing from me.
No, not from me either.
No, that's all from me.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us. I'm sorry there's not been more updates from a positive point of view in terms of government announcements. We will keep you updated as and when anything comes out, or if and when anything comes out. In the meantime, if you have any queries, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we are likely to be holding another webinar next week, so we will forward details as soon as we have them. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.